It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the UMindfulness lecture of Dan Harris. I think we're all in for a wonderful treat. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Amishi Jha, and I am an associate professor of psychology here in the College of Arts and Sciences on the Coral Gables campus of the University of Miami. And in addition to my role as a professor, I'm also co-director of the UMindfulness initiative, which is a multi-school, collaborative, university-wide initiative that I am co-director of with my wonderful partner in crime, Scott Rogers, who you'll get to hear in a minute. And I wanted to just spend 2 minutes to tell you a little bit about our initiative for those of you for whom this is the first lecture. How many of you are new to this series that we've got? Oh, good, well, welcome. The UMindfulness initiative is actually been around for 4 years, and this lecture series is part of a very generous gift by Mrs. Tusi Kluge, who's actually in the past been able to join us for these, but she's not here today. She's in Germany, so I wanted to just give her a real deep bow of gratitude, and as well as the College of Arts and Sciences, who's a co-sponsor for this event. You'll see that there's a student sitting on meditation cushions. Tusi actually leads a student, and this year student, faculty, and staff mindfulness retreat at the Deering Estate. This year it'll be in November. So I wanted to just thank both the college as well as Mrs. Kluge. So our initiative, as I said, it's a university-wide effort, and really the intention is pretty straightforward. We want to promote research and practice of mindfulness throughout, which means that we have kind of 3 main pillars that we want to grow in our effort. And I'm so happy because even for this lecture series, we've gone from 200 to 300 and now 400 folks. So I think it's wonderful to see mindfulness taking root in our community. One of these pillars is actually community building. We want to meet, and we've been able to start doing that very well with other members of the university who are interested in using contemplative training in their research as well as their clinical practice. We're very interested in actually offering back to the community within the university and broadly training opportunities. Every time I get an opportunity to talk about mindfulness, one of the very common questions I get is, where can I go to learn about it? And one of the things we hope to grow in the next few years is more opportunities for the university to serve as a hub by which people can learn about direct training in this. And then finally, an area that's actually near and dear to my heart is research in contemplative neuroscience, which is, thankfully, as you'll hear from Dan, one of the things that I think convinced him to try to give meditation a try. My lab is interested in understanding what the brain basis of the changes that might come with mindfulness training and other forms of contemplative training. We've got a university-wide brain initiative with a 3 Tesla brain imaging scanner, functional MRI scanner, just down the road from here that's part of the psychology department in the college. We also have some wonderful collaborations with our research efforts, including the medical school, nursing school, of course, the law school with my collaborator on all of this, who is Scott Rogers, who you'll hear, like I said, in a minute. Scott already had founded and was very successfully running the mindfulness in law program at the law school here when I arrived 4 years ago from the University of Pennsylvania. So it was sort of a perfect opportunity to come together where he was offering training to lawyers, law students, judges, some of whom are here today. And I was already interested in seeing the brain basis for these techniques. So we came together and now are so happy that we've got an entire community of researchers and practitioners that are interested in this work. So that's a little bit about our initiative. And I wanted to tell you about some upcoming events. On October 18th, one of our community partners, Mindful Kids Miami, is hosting a day-long mindfulness conference where the dean of the medical school, the superintendent of the Miami-Dade School District, and many others will be speaking about the topic of offering mindfulness in the healthcare and education contexts. So join us for that. We're co-sponsors of that event. We've got a student, faculty, and staff retreat happening, as I said, at the Deering Estate on November 8th. And then our next UMindfulness speaker will be Congressman Tim Ryan. That'll be back here at the Newman Alumni Center on November 10th. So I invite you back for that event as well. A good way to find out about all that we're doing and all the events that are happening is to just follow us through social media. We now have a Facebook page, a Twitter handle, and of course you can go to our website as well. So I wanted to keep this short and just again end by welcoming you all, and now you get to hear from Scott Rogers, who will introduce our speaker tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Amishi. And when I say thanks, Amishi, I mean thank you, Amishi, because collaborating with you is an extraordinary privilege. The important and meaningful grants and research questions that you're investigating in your lab that we all have an opportunity to join in with is an extraordinary opportunity, and that we're all here in Miami with UMindfulness and the development of the UMindfulness community get to sort of participate in that in its various forms is, I think, a very rich and rare opportunity. So thank you very much for all that you do. We have this really interesting opportunity tonight. Part of the UMindfulness initiative is, of course, the speaker series. Today, we bring and have the opportunity to listen to Dan Harris, who has a wonderful book that is making its way across many, many interesting circles and many, many interesting conversations. As you may know, Dan, where is Dan? Good. Dan is it's good to know you're in the room, Dan. Dan is an Emmy Award-winning ABC correspondent. He's been covering wars in that very tricky and challenging environment for many years. He is co-anchor of Nightline and of the weekend edition of Good Morning America, and he is the best-selling author of this New York Times 10% Happier. I think this book is a treasure. I think this book is a treasure. I think it comes at an extraordinary opportunity. I loved reading this book. The reasons, among many, that I love reading this book are because Dan, who has a really great job, who's really great at his job, who's been doing it for a while, who has a national reputation, who reaches a national audience, gets to meet with and talk with a lot of very interesting people. And so this book is really his narrative. It's his story, sort of, if you will, around and navigating through and into mindfulness, something that many of us are richly a part of or beginning to explore or just interested in. And so he weaves throughout this narrative these conversations that he has with these very interesting people. People the likes of Deepak Chopra, of Eckhart Tolle, and he shares with us sort of his take on it. He's very real, he's very authentic, he's very genuine. You read it and you are a part of that story. And if you're into mindfulness and the really extraordinary and great teachers that we have still among us today in the West, he has these very interesting sort of behind-the-scenes interactions and conversations with the likes of luminaries such as Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg. And what I think is really interesting is that as you read this and you go along with his journey, which might in many ways parallel your journey or your interest and fascination, his aha moments, and he's very deliberate and beautifully writes about these moments, can become your moments, or you join with him in the insights that he realizes become something that deepen your own understanding of this very interesting and challenging terrain of mindfulness. So, I think one of the other things that I take away from this book that I can't help but not, even upon reflection, is it is hysterical. Dan has an extraordinary wit, a great humor, and he, I guess because you're able to take these big stories and break them into these very short, meaningful ways of sharing them with people across the world, you're able to do that in this book. And so I can't go but maybe 4 or 5 pages without laughing out loud, genuinely laughing out loud, which is something I don't always do, or have a big smile on my face. And that's very compelling to be a part of this kind of a story. So Dan, thank you very much for writing this book. Thank you for writing it at this time. And thank you for being here today to be with us and to tell us a little bit about this really important material that you have put together and share with us. So please, if you all would, join me in welcoming Dan Harris.
I didn't mean to make a dramatic through the audience entry. It was because I was late to my own party because I was going to the bathroom. That was, maybe I've done a lot of speeches. That was perhaps the best introduction I've had in a long time. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And you pointed out when I got here that I needed to wipe my nose, which was also very useful. So I owe you 2 times. Thanks for having me. I love Miami. It's great to be back here. I was supposed to do a PowerPoint tonight, but I very mindfully forgot to send it. So you're going to get the a cappella version of the talk. So I'm going to tell you a story, which will be useful, I hope, on a couple levels. But one of the important thing is that once you hear the story, you won't have to read the book. So how I stumbled into mindfulness starts with a panic attack on live television. It happened almost exactly 10 years ago in June of 2004. I was anchoring the news updates on Good Morning America. That's the person who comes on and reads the headlines at the top of each hour. And I had done the job before, so I had no reason to foresee what was about to happen. A couple seconds into my spiel, I was overtaken by this irresistible bolt of fear. My heart started racing, my palms started sweating, my mouth dried up, my lungs seized up. I just couldn't breathe. And I had to do something that I had never done before, which I just quit in the middle and tossed it back to the hosts of the show, Diane Sawyer and Charlie Gibson. And it was extremely, extremely embarrassing and scary. And the backstory of why and how it happened is also embarrassing. I arrived at ABC News. By the way, just one more thing about that panic attack is that I because I'm a masochist, I asked the nice people in our research department to look up the audience numbers. And according to the Nielsen ratings, there were 5.019 million people watching. So no big deal. So the backstory is that I arrived at ABC News when I was 28. I usually show a picture of myself that they took of me on my first day at work. I look barely post-pubescent and terrified. And that picture is still on my security ID, so later I can show you one-on-one. Actually, I look so young and scared that a friend of mine at work said that if you take a wide shot, it looks like I might be holding a balloon. So I get to ABC, and I'm working with all these big shots, Peter Jennings, Diane Sawyer, Barbara Walters, and here I am, very young, very green, very self-conscious about being both young and green. And my way of compensating for that was to become a workaholic. I just threw myself into the job. And then 9/11 happened shortly after I got there, and I raised my hand to go overseas to cover the ensuing conflicts, frankly, without thinking much about the psychological consequences. And so I spent a lot of time in places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, West Bank, Gaza, Israel, and then I made 6 or 7 trips to Iraq. And when I came home after one particularly long and hairy stretch in Iraq in 2003, I got depressed. And actually, I didn't even know I was depressed, which is also embarrassing. Although I was exhibiting what I now know to be the classic signs of depression. Sorry, I was momentarily thrown off by the fact that there are kids here because I swear a lot, so maybe I have to not. It's okay? All right, earmuffs, kids. It's so great, like, as an aside, to speak without FCC oversight, because I can say whatever the hell I want. I could even, like, drink a beer up here if I had to. I don't drink, but anyway. You'll hear why in a second. I spent a lot of time, I got home, I got depressed, and I did something really stupid, which was I started to self-medicate with cocaine and ecstasy. I heard a gasp. Let me assure you, it was not like the Wolf of Wall Street or anything like that. It was pretty sporadic, and for a reasonably short period of time, 18 to 24 months, never when I was working, and definitely not when I was on the air. I like to say that I was stupid, but not that stupid. After the panic attack, I went to a shrink who is one of the preeminent experts in panic, and he asked me a bunch of questions to figure out what was going on. And one of the questions was, do you do drugs? And so rather sheepishly, I said, yeah, I do. And he said, well, he actually leaned back in his chair and gave me this look that I read to mean as, okay, asshole, mystery solved. He explained that even though I had been doing, even though I hadn't been doing that much, I mean, there's no good amount, but I hadn't been, like I said, like, no, not Wolf of Wall Street. It was enough to raise the level of adrenaline in my brain, and almost certainly is what triggered that panic attack. So this was a big moment for me. I realized very powerfully what a moron I'd been, and I made 2 decisions. One was I quit using drugs, which seemed like a no-brainer. And 2, I agreed to go see this guy once or twice a week indefinitely. However, this isn't like some happy, neat, clean story where all of a sudden I start meditating and all my problems go away. It took me, there were a couple of other things that had to happen. One of them was, and this one I didn't see coming, around that time, Peter Jennings, who was my boss, assigned me to cover faith and spirituality for ABC News, which was an assignment I really didn't want. I was raised in the People's Republic of Massachusetts by a pair of secular scientists. I did have a bar mitzvah, but only for the money. That's my best line of the night, by the way. I use it all the time. And I had, I just had no interest in the subject. And I explained this to Peter, not the mercenary bar mitzvah part, but the rest of it, and he didn't care. He said, you're going to do it anyway. It turned out to be like a great thing for me, and I made a lot of friends. I learned a ton. I spent years hanging around in mega churches and mosques and Mormon temples, and really developed a deep and abiding respect for the value of having a worldview that transcends your own narrow interests, which was quite useful for an ambitious young guy. That said, nothing that I encountered spoke to me personally. I didn't go kosher or anything like that. Until many years into this beat, in about 2008, so many years after getting this assignment and many years after having the panic attack, one of my producers said, you should read a book by this guy, Eckhart Tolle. Does anybody know who Eckhart Tolle is? Okay. All right, so a lot of, okay. You may not like what I say next. Anyway, so I read the book. She was explaining, I had no idea who he was, and he's a huge self-help guru, and my producer was explaining, Oprah loves him, all these celebrities love him, he's selling millions of books, we should maybe do a story. So I get one of his books, and it strikes me at first glance as irretrievable, irredeemable bullshit. I mean, just terrible. And it's all this weird language about vibrational fields, and all these pseudo-scientific claims are like demonstrably untrue. And I can't prove this next thing is untrue, but it just seemed untrue to me. He says, A, that the book is going to provoke a spiritual awakening, whatever the hell that means, in you, the reader, and that after his own personal spiritual awakening, he lived in a state of bliss on park benches in London for 2 years. As far as I know, they have winter in London. Anyway, I was not impressed by this book, but I kept reading, and he started to unfurl this thesis about the human condition that I had never heard before. His argument is that we all have a voice in our heads, by which he is not referring to schizophrenia or hearing voices. He's talking about your inner narrator, the voice that chases you out of bed in the morning, is constantly yammering all day long, has you wanting stuff, not wanting stuff, criticizing things, criticizing yourself, comparing yourself to other people, thinking about the past and thinking about the future to the detriment of whatever's happening right now. My friend Sam says about his own voice in the head is that he thinks he might have been hijacked by the most boring person alive, because it just says the same shit over and over and over again. And most of it is negative, and almost all of it is self-referential. And when you're unaware of this voice, sorry kids, when you're unaware of this voice, it, according to Tolle, yanks you around. It's why you are eating when you're not hungry, or checking your iPhone when your kid's trying to talk to you, or losing your temper when it's strategically unwise. And this was a huge aha moment for me. I realized, okay, A, this is intuitively true, and I think universally true, and B, this voice is why I did all the things that led to the most embarrassing moment of my life. It's why I went to war zones without thinking about the consequences, why I came home and got depressed and was not even self-aware enough to know it, and then why I blindly self-medicated and it all blew up in my face. The problem was, as far as I could tell, Tolle offered no actionable advice for dealing with this voice in the head. I went and interviewed him to the delight of my producer, and I asked him, point blank, what do you do about the voice in the head? And he said, wait for it, take one conscious breath. What the hell does that mean? I pressed him. I'm a good journalist. I pressed him. I heard nothing useful in the entire interview. And then he went on to tell me that he never gets in a bad mood, even if you cut him off in traffic or whatever. So I found that pretty deeply unsatisfying. It was like he had pointed out that my hair was on fire, but refused to hand me a fire extinguisher. And not knowing what else to do, and again, being completely new to this whole idea, I threw myself into the world of self-help, which is not a pretty place, where I met a bunch of these idiots who will tell you that you can solve all of your problems through the power of positive thinking, which is, I'm sorry to say, not going to happen. And I can get on my high horse about that later if anybody wants. And then a couple of weeks, maybe months, I can't remember exactly, a little while later, I walked home one night and my wife came through with a save. She said, you know, I've been listening to you talk with varying levels of cogency about Eckhart Tolle and Deepak Chopra and the voice in your head and blah, blah, blah. And it reminds me of this book I read a while ago. Here it is. And it was a book by a guy named Dr. Mark Epstein, who is a shrink in New York City, who writes about the overlap between psychology and Buddhism. And notwithstanding the fact that I was ostensibly a religion reporter, I actually didn't know anything about Buddhism, except that I had stolen a statue of the Buddha as a 15-year-old punk kid from a local gardening store and put it in my room because I thought it looked cool. And as I started to read through Epstein's book, it was another huge aha moment. I realized, oh, all the stuff that I like about Eckhart Tolle is right here, and seemed to have been lifted without much attribution from this overweight guy 2,500 years ago. By the way, actually, the statues you see of a fat Buddha, that's not actually the Buddha. We can talk about that later, too, if you want. But I thought he was fat. Anyway, where was I? 2,500 years before Tolle started cashing his royalty checks, it was the Buddha who was talking about the voice in the head. He called it the monkey mind. According to the Buddha, our minds are like furry little gibbons thrashing through a forest of urges and impulses and desires, latching onto things that won't last, and hurling ourselves from one hit of pleasant experience to the next, never fully satisfied. And unlike Eckhart Tolle, the Buddha had actionable advice for dealing with the monkey mind. My problem at this point was what he was suggesting sounded completely repellent, which was meditation. My view of meditation was that it was only for freaks and weirdos and people who live in a yurt and collect crystals and are really into John Tesh and Cat Stevens and aromatherapy and ultimate frisbee and wear little finger symbols and whatever. I thought I bought every stereotype there is. They're not all untrue, by the way. But then I learned two things that were key. One, there's been an enormous amount of science that is still in its early stages, but strongly suggestive of a long list of benefits from meditation. That it can lower your blood pressure, boost your immune system, reduce the release of the stress hormone cortisol. And where things get really interesting is the neuroscience, which seems that meditating, short daily doses of meditation, can essentially rewire key parts of your brain. One study that I like, in fact, this study got my mom to meditate. It was done at Harvard. It shows that people who had never meditated before, they were given an 8-week class, did a little bit of meditating every day. Then they scanned their brains, and they found that the areas of the brain associated with compassion and self-awareness, the gray matter literally grew. In the area associated with stress, the gray matter literally shrank. Very, very compelling stuff. And the second thing I learned is that meditation does not require joining a group, sitting in a funny position unless you really want to, wearing a special outfit, paying any fees, believing in anything. It's actually simple, secular brain exercise. In fact, here, there are a lot of kinds of meditation, but I'm specifically referring to a kind called mindfulness. I'm not going to make you do it, but there are 3 simple steps. In fact, I taught the New York Times tech reporter how to meditate in fewer letters than it takes to send a tweet. One, sit with your eyes closed and your back straight. Two, try to focus all of your attention on the feeling of the breath coming in and going out, usually at wherever it's most prominent, your nose or your belly. And three, and this is the key, when you try to do this, your mind is going to go nuts. You're going to start thinking about, what am I going to have for lunch? Why did I say that dumb thing to my boss? Why did Dances with Wolves beat Goodfellas for Best Picture in 1991? Why do celebrities only marry other celebrities? Whatever. You're just going to go off. It's just the way your mind works. And the whole game is to notice when your mind is off thinking about lunch and return your focus to your breath over and over and over again. And when you do that, it's a bicep curl for your brain. And it shows up on the brain scans. You're doing this radical thing. Instead of spending, as we do most of our lives, instead of enveloping yourself in this fog, this daydream that we're in of the rumination about the past and projection into the future, you're focusing on whatever's happening right now. So I gave it a try. I started with 5 or 10 minutes. I found pretty quickly that there were 3 benefits. One, focus. My ability to focus got better. I can't prove that. It just feels like it got better. I have a very stressful job. I literally have somebody talking into my ear at high volume. You know, like the rest of you, am subject to the laws of the info blitzkrieg, where I'm, you know, getting emails and texts and tweets and all that stuff all the time. And, you know, it's really hard to focus on one thing at a time. And the daily exercise of just getting lost and coming back and getting lost and starting over, et cetera, made me, I felt, better at doing my work. The second thing was it made me calmer. You know, just stepping out of the traffic for a couple minutes every day calmed me down a little bit. Again, not a silver bullet, but just a little bit of calm. And the third thing is the big thing. It's this word mindfulness. It gets tossed around a lot these days. I think often when I read articles about mindfulness, I can tell that the person who's written it doesn't know what they're talking about. It's an extremely rich word, even though it sounds boring. But here's a simple, serviceable definition. Mindfulness is the ability to see what's going on in your mind at any given moment without getting carried away by it. I'm going to say that again because this is a game changer. It's the ability to notice what's happening in your head right now without necessarily taking the bait and acting on it. So just imagine how useful this can be. You're driving here tonight, somebody cuts you off in traffic, what happens? Generally speaking, you immediately have this thought of, I'm angry. And then what happens? You reflexively and automatically inhabit that thought. You actually become angry. There's no buffer between the incident and your emotional reaction to it. With mindfulness on board, you might be able to notice, oh, that person just cut me off, my chest is buzzing, my ears are red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to chase that person down the road with your kids in the back, you know, flipping them off or whatever. This is extremely useful. Now, I can hear some of you thinking, perhaps, well, aren't there times where you need to get angry? Definitely. I think fewer than you think, but sure, there are times where difficult emotions are warranted. And the argument behind meditation is not that you should become sort of non-judgmental blob who just goes with the flow to the point of ridiculousness. The idea is that you're supposed to develop the ability to respond wisely to things instead of reacting blindly. This is a very attractive idea when you spell it out in plain English, which is why we're now seeing corporations doing it. Google, Aetna, Twitter, Procter & Gamble, General Mills. These are the people that make Hamburger Helper, and they have meditation rooms in every building in their corporate campus in Minnetonka, Minnesota. It's now also being done by athletes like the Seattle Seahawks, who won the Super Bowl, as you may remember. Novak Djokovic, who did well at Wimbledon, as you may remember. Entertainers like the lead singer of Weezer, Katy Perry, 50 Cent, who, as I just said to somebody, got shot 9 times, so he deserves a little meditation in his life. And perhaps most compellingly, by the U.S. Marines and the U.S. Army, as Dr. Amishi Jha has been working with the Army here at the University of Miami, which is really fascinating from a cultural perspective, and on a human level, really valuable potentially to be able to teach these troops to be more effective and resilient in the field, perhaps make better decisions, not to intimate that they're not making good decisions, but they are forced to make life and death decisions all the time, and perhaps to also be less prone to PTSD, which is an epidemic. There's also some thought that meditation might help treat people who already have PTSD. So it's now catching on in these sort of very interesting corners of the culture, which is why I believe meditation is the next big public health revolution. I will say that my powers of prognostication are historically weak. In the early part of the 2000s, I convinced my brother to buy a lot of stock in the company that makes the Palm Pilot, which that didn't go well. I still stand by this particular prediction, though. I do think that we're heading into a future where meditation isn't going to be viewed as weird anymore. It will be viewed the same way we view physical exercise. You know, in the 1940s, if you told somebody, I'm going running, they would say, who's chasing you? And then what happened? The science showed that it's really good for you, and so now we all do it, and if we don't do it, we feel guilty about it. And I think that's what's going to happen with meditation, that it's just going to fall into the bucket of no-brainers, like physical exercise, eating healthfully, taking the meds your doctor prescribes for you, getting enough sleep, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the health consequences of that are profound, but I also think the social consequences of that are even more profound. Now, I want to be clear, and I've said this already as I wrap up, but I think it bears repeating, it is not going to solve all of your problems. I've been doing it for 5 years. It has not regrown my hair in key areas of my head or made me taller, which is why I entitled the book 10% Happier. I mean, clearly that's an absurd estimate, but it's close enough, and it sounds like a pretty good return on investment. And when I started using that as an explanation, when people asked me, what's the matter with you, why did you start meditating, I found that people started to look less skeptical. The problem, I think, the barrier between all this compelling science and people adopting this in their personal life is that for too long, meditation has been talked about in a way that is off-putting to skeptics. So now there's a small group of us, including Tim Ryan, who's coming here in a couple of weeks, who are trying to talk about it in a different way, with less namaste and talk of sacred spaces and all this other stuff that, for somebody like me, is very, very annoying. Very annoying. Actually, to be honest with you, once you're in the tent, actually becomes not so annoying. But I think that it does keep people out. And so I think that's a key thing. And as we get more people in the military and in corporations who are into it, hopefully they'll be able to spread it in a viral way to places that never otherwise would get it. The proposition here is incredible and truly empowering. The idea that, I think most of us walk around thinking, with either consciously or subconsciously, that our happiness depends on external factors like, did we marry well? How were the circumstances of our childhood? Did we get a raise recently? Have we hit the lottery? Whatever. But in fact, the idea behind meditation is that happiness is a skill. It's something you can train the way you train your body in the gym. And that is really liberating. As I said, it's not going to solve all of your problems, and in my case, if my wife were here, she would give you the 90% still a moron speech. Or my little brother has recommended as an alternate, this is the guy who I convinced to invest in Palm Pilot, he recommended as an alternate title to the book, From Deeply Flawed to Merely Flawed. I'll close with this. 5 minutes a day. Scientists haven't worked out the dosage issue. We don't know how little meditation you can do and still derive these benefits, but I just say 5 minutes a day is a great way to start. In fact, you can, in my view, do 5 minutes in perpetuity, and that would be fantastic, because it's that daily collision with the asshole in your head that will prevent you some percentage of the time from taking the shitty suggestions that the voice is offering up to you all the time. And that I think is extremely valuable. And here's my little tagline. If it can work for a fidgety, skeptical news anchor, it can work for you. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you. We can take questions. We have some time for questions. Are there mics? So yell your question. I can hear you, and then I'll repeat it. And I'll warn you that if you don't ask me questions, even though we don't have a teleprompter, I can speak at length. So ask me something, or I'll just start talking. Hey, thank you. David G. So she asked if, she said that she pointed out that I had done some work at the Chopra Center, and had I met David G. I don't even know who that is, so I guess not. I didn't do that much work at the Chopra Center. He was kind of one of the guys I met along the way, who I like a lot, but I make fun of relentlessly in the book. So that wasn't like a huge, meaningful part of stop along the journey for me, although I was still in touch with Deepak and do view him warmly, but I also like to make fun of him.
Who taught you how to meditate?
I read it in books. I mean, it's not complicated. I do think going to classes makes, she asked who taught me how to meditate. I read about it in books, and I just, the 3 steps I spelled out before, I mean, that'll get you started. I mean, you could do that all the way to enlightenment. Which I don't even know if I believe in, but I don't think, the beginning instructions aren't super complicated. You can read a book. I have instructions in the back of mine, and you can get going. However, I do think classes are extremely valuable, and I have a meditation teacher, and I go on retreat, and I go to classes, and I am friends with a lot of people who meditate, and I do think that the more you are surrounded by people who do it, that there has like an HOV lane effect. And it's a big deal. In fact, the Buddha said, I'm not big on quoting the Buddha as if he's the authority on everything, but he did say that one of the most important factors is surrounding yourself with wise people. And I've just had the great good fortune of a lot of people in my life have become meditators now, and I have a lot of friends who are, new friends. I would recommend to all of you that if you're thinking about starting, read some good books. Now you don't have to read mine, but my friend Sharon Salzberg wrote a book called Real Happiness, which is a great how to get started guide, and written in plain English, and it's good for skeptics. I recommend it to everybody. And so read a book like that and give it a shot. Yes? It's a big surprise at the end. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. So she's asking, she basically said, meditation sucks, why do you do it? First of all, big mazel on starting to meditate. That's good. That's great, actually. And yeah, it's hard. Nobody should lie to you about that. It's hard. I hear all the time from people, you don't understand. I get it. Meditation is good for you, but I could never do it because my mind is so busy. And I call this the fallacy of uniqueness argument. The good news and the bad news is you are not special. Everybody's mind works like that. Welcome to the human condition. The whole game is to get lost and start again. Get lost and start again. And it gets easier with time, but for me, I've been doing it for 5 years and it's still hard. It's much less torturous than it was at the beginning, because if you've never tried to train your brain in this way, your mind in this way, it's just, you're trying to break a lifetime worth of, bad habits, and it's difficult. So I would say 2 things. Don't worry that it's hard. That means you're probably doing it right. And 2, it will get easier with time. And even if it doesn't, 5 minutes, you know, you can make it through that. It's like going to the, think about it like going to the gym. If you go to the gym and it's easy, you're cheating. And, you know, we spend so much time on our looks and our stock portfolios and our cars and our homes. There is one filter through which you experience all of that stuff, and that's your mind. And tuning it up is a good idea. If it's not easy, I would argue it's still worth it. You and then you.
Would your wife say that she's seen appreciable change?
Yes, it depends which, he asked, would my wife say that she's seen an appreciable change in me? Depends which day you ask her. A couple days ago, she would have said no. Yeah, for sure. You know, I mean, I noticed that our fights really just don't escalate the way they used to. And I guess that would indicate that the person escalating it was always me, because she doesn't meditate. So thank you for that. She would definitely say that there's been a change. There's no question. I think the big thing is taking out my stress from work, because she's not really a source of stress for me. The work is a source of stress, and even though I love it, but I would take it home. And I meant to say this before, and maybe somebody's going to ask me this, and I'm preempting it. I still think if you're striving for greatness in any arena, professional, parenting, grandparenting, volunteer work, whatever you're doing, art, there's a certain amount of stress and striving and plotting and planning that's just part of the deal. My argument isn't that everything should be a parade of unicorns and rainbows. It's just that we tend to make our suffering worse than it needs to be. And for me, what mindfulness has allowed me to do is draw the line, more or less successfully, between what I call constructive anguish and useless rumination. And that is what has helped me do a lot less of storming into the apartment at night and just stewing in a corner or whatever. And that was unpleasant for me and for her. Yes, in the back.
Can you talk a little bit about how, or give us some examples of how some major corporations have implemented this or worked this into the daily life of their employees?
The best example is General Mills. They had a really influential inside sleeper cell, one-woman sleeper cell, who just basically spread this thing virally within the corporation. Her name is Janice Martirano. She's great. She was a hard-charging corporate attorney. She's still pretty hard-charging, although she's doing something different now. And she was at a really stressful point in her life and ended up on a meditation retreat, skeptical, and found it to be transformative, and started getting really into it. And people started asking her at work, why are you so cool now? And she eventually came out and said, okay, I'm a meditator. And she started teaching her other the fellow executives, and formalized it. And now they're teaching hundreds of people at General Mills. So they have classes, regular classes, and they have meditation rooms that are available all the time to workers to have a quiet place to go do it. And that is, I think, what we're seeing right now, which is that corporations, it's still a very small number, are offering classes and places to do it. This is still in a really germinal stage. And I have a friend who's written a book that's coming out about it's called Mindful Work, and it's about meditation in corporations. And what he's found is that there are some good examples, but the vast majority of corporations aren't doing it, and we've got a ways to go.
I like in the book how you reference during your self-medicating years of all the new friends that you have, and then the new friends that you have through your meditation. My question is, how have your peers received your book and your story?
How have my peers received the book? Really well. I mean, I don't know if they like the book, but I mean, nobody's going to say that to my face. But it seems like they like it. It seems like they're cool with it. I was really worried about admitting the drug use thing. I was saying to one of the student reporters beforehand that I got an email from my mom a couple weeks before the book came out begging me not to publish the book because of the drug thing. And that freaked me out because I'm pretty tight with my mom. And I went to Diane Sawyer to talk to her about it. And she said, I love your mom, but she's wrong. And in hindsight, I'm really glad I listened to Diane. Interestingly, my mom is really glad I listened to Diane. When the book started to do well, it's like my parents were like, what misgivings? We didn't have any misgivings. I'm really glad that I did it the way I did it, you know. And there's something, it's very liberating to, you know, tell everybody the most embarrassing stuff you've done, and people are like, sweet, you did coke, great. You know, it's like nobody's that upset about it. And the sun rose the next morning, and I still have a job. I thought maybe affiliates in the South would not want me on in Good Morning America anymore, talking to their children, and everybody seems to be totally cool with it. And actually, it is humbling. And that's a word that I find very annoying when you hear at the Oscars, for example, when people say, oh, I'm really humbled to get this award. That's like the opposite of humbling. In this case, I actually mean it, because what I learned is that actually people aren't that interested in me. You know, everybody's the star of their own movie. And so when I admitted that I was a screw-up, everybody's like, oh, so me too, you know, no big deal. But what do you have that's useful for me? And luckily, I think I have something, I mean, it's not mine, I just stumbled upon this thing that's been around for 2,500 years that is useful for everybody. I don't know, I went way off from the basis of your question, but thanks.
Do you have any advice about navigating all of the resources that are out there now on mindfulness? I feel like sometimes we can get caught in a trap of just constantly reading about it and not actually sitting. It's much easier to read about it than to sit and practice and then have their own spin on it. So how would you address that?
That's a great question. Her question was, there are so many resources out there about mindfulness and meditation, and everybody's got their own spin, and you can find yourself in this endless cycle of just reading all the time, because frankly, reading is easier than sitting. I would say at the beginning, pick one horse and bet on it. I'm just making this up now because nobody's ever asked me this question before, but I like it. I'm giving you an honest answer. Hopefully everything I've said has been reasonably honest. Pick one horse for now and just go with that, because you can get into an intellectual spiral. Later, once you have a solid foundation in meditation practice, you can read, you know, start reading Tibetan masters and you know, Hindu mystics or whatever. But for now, I think, you know, pick somebody like Sharon Salzberg, read the book, do what she says, and you're in good hands. She's not going to try to recruit you to some weird religious organization. She doesn't want your money or anything like that. She's just trying to teach you how to meditate. And then once you're kind of up and running with your 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes or whatever you choose to do, then read around. The other place that I like in terms of getting started is Headspace, which is an app. And these guys, Andy Puttycombe, the guy who started it was a monk for 10 years. He's young, he's really cool, and he knows what he's talking about, because there are people out there who don't know what they're talking about. And he's developed an app that really works. People use it and they start meditating, and you know, you can stay with it indefinitely. Hold on, I'll come back to you. Yes?
I'm interested in hearing about what your meditation practice is today, and also what if anything would you have to give up in order to find the time and energy?
So what is my meditation practice today, and what, if anything, did I have to give up in order to find the time to do it? I do 35 minutes. I hesitate to say that because my whole shtick is to try to take away all of your excuses. And one of the big excuses is that I don't have time. And the 5-minute thing is, I don't care if you've got 3 jobs and 17 kids, like everybody's got 5 minutes. You know, right when you wake up, right before you go to bed, when you pull your car into the driveway, before you go into the house, set an alarm on your phone and have at it. So I do 35 minutes, but I really built up to that over time. And I don't think I've had to give up anything, maybe a little bit of extra TV time. Here's the thing, we're about to have our first kid. So, thank you, thanks. So I already have this vision of the first sentence of my next book, which is, everything in my last book was bullshit. It looks like it might be a good line. So we'll see. I mean, I'm prepared to accordion the sitting down, because clearly my priority is going to be the kid. But thus far, I feel it's just like when I wake up in the morning, I think, what's my workday entail? How am I going to fit in exercise and meditation? And some days I don't get it, but even on those days I do 5 to 10 minutes. And I think that what happens over time with meditation is that it starts to bleed into your whole life, because this practice isn't something that being mindful, being non-judgmentally aware of whatever's happening, isn't something that you're tuning up. You're doing the reps on the chair or on the cushion, but actually you're supposed to use it the rest of your life. And so walking through an airport, instead of letting my mind wander to, do I need a haircut, I can actually just feel my feet on the ground, and that can bleed into everything you're doing. For example, like when you're asking me the question, instead of thinking about what my answer is going to be, I can just actually listen to what you're saying. It does offer you up a whole new way of living your life. So I actually have some friends who really cut down on their formal sitting time and just feel like they're living in it. There was somebody over here. Hi. Can you just say that one more time? Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing is you're not alone. Very common, depression. Horrible, but nothing to be ashamed of, and good for you for coming out of it. And give yourself a break. Meditation is hard, and so when you're sitting there trying to meditate and you find yourself thinking, oh, I'm trying to meditate right now, I've got all this other stuff going on in my life, I'm trying to pull myself together, just notice, oh, I'm thinking right now. I'm judging myself, and start again with the breath. And you're just going to have to do that over and over again. And that skill of noticing when you've quote-unquote failed and starting again, that is incredibly scalable to the rest of your life, because we live in a universe characterized by impermanence and entropy, where we control very little, and we're all going to die, and everybody we know is going to die, and these are the hard facts. And things are going to get difficult at times. And what you need is resilience. And that act of failing and starting over is a really good way to build it. So I would say, give yourself a break if you're struggling. Recognize that everybody does. Everybody who's not enlightened struggles at starting to meditate. And I would say, give yourself some credit for having the gumption and the grit to pick yourself up after going through depression, which I can tell you firsthand, having gone through it myself, is terrible. So good for you is what I would say. One more? Okay. Okay. She said, when you meditate, do you, actually she said when you do the meditating, which is awesome. When you meditate, what do you do? Would you visualize something? How do you decide what to meditate on? So the word meditation is kind of like the word sports. It describes a whole range of activities. Badminton and water polo don't have a lot in common, but they're both sports. So there are a million ways to meditate. I think the right way to get started, and there are lots of good ways to get started, but one very solid way to get started, and this is where most of the science has been, is on this very simple practice that I described before of trying to notice, where's my breath coming in right now, and feeling the entire breath coming in and going out. And when you try to do that, you're going to get lost, and you're going to have to start over of just feeling your breath coming in and feeling your breath going out. You don't have to breathe in a special way. It's just naturally, how does it feel as my breath comes in and my breath goes out? I think that's a great way to get started, but there are lots of other practices that do involve visualization. As you said before, there's a rich tradition in the Tibetan history of visualization. I don't know anything about it, so I can't say anything about it because I've never done it. But there is one other thing I would just say about visualization, which is there's a kind of meditation that's also received a lot of scientific study. It's known as compassion meditation. It's like, it sounds terrible. It sounds like a Valentine's Day with a machete to your throat. You basically sit there and visualize a series of people and send them good vibes. So when I first heard about this, I would have rather run into traffic than do this. However, the science is very compelling. It shows that not only does it have all these incredibly attractive physiological benefits, like lower blood pressure, lower stress, et cetera, but it also has been shown, again, in early studies, to make people nicer. Preschool students, after being taught how to do this, are more likely to give their stickers away to strangers. And as a guy who, you know, I mean, like, I think I said this in the book that, you know, you might have caught me welling up in a rom-com, but other than that, like, I didn't think of myself as a particularly compassionate guy. It was very, you know, the idea that you can make yourself nicer is really cool. That it too, like happiness, is a skill that you can train. It can change your whole view of yourself in the world, and so that is a kind of visualizing meditation that I try to do every day for a couple of minutes. I guess there are more questions, but I guess we're also out of time. Oh, Sharon Salzberg. Yes. In the back of my book, I recommend some other books, but if you don't feel like reading the book now that you've heard me talk, which is totally cool, Sharon Salzberg is a really good way to start. And she's friends with Amishi. Thank you, everybody.